This week on a sort of young person's guide to prog rock, before we leave the first flowering of early prog forever, we catch back up with King Crimson for their mid-70s renaissance with Lark's Tongue and Aspic, Starless and Bible Black, and Red. So, hello and welcome back to a sort of young person's guide to prog rock. I am your host, Ian Prize. So the last 2 or so weeks, we've seen the apex of 1970s prog with Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Brain Salad Surgery. We touched on mid-70s Yes, and we talked about Songs from the Woods from Jethro Tull. But before we leave the initial flowering of classic prog forever, we catch back up with King Crimson in 1972 for their renaissance. So these 3 albums, Lark's Tongue and Aspic, Starless and Bible Black, and Red, would feature bassist and vocalist John Wetton, Bill Bruford, fresh off of Close to the Edge on drums, David Cross on violin, Jamie Muir on percussion, and the sexy mushroom himself, Robert Fripp, on electric and acoustic guitars. This era of King Crimson would attempt some of the most ambitious fusion of jazz improvisation with Eastern European classical music tonality and, of course, a good old dollop of heavy rock. So when we last left King Crimson, they had just released In the Court of the Crimson King, considered by many to be at least a good enough candidate for the first true prog album. Touring difficulties had led to the dissolution of that era of the band, but Robert Fripp would be back into the studio to produce In the Wake of Poseidon, which we also talked about. It was either a useless retread or an epic retelling of In the Court of the Crimson King. However, the studio band would dissolve, and Robert Fripp would try to reform the band twice more for the album Lizard and the album Islands. Both of these albums kind of disappear down a path of alienating oddness. But in 1972, Robert Fripp would try one more time and recruit John Wetton, Jamie Muir, David Cross, and of course Bill Bruford, late of Yes, to record Lark's Tongue and Aspic, a wide-ranging album based mostly around free improvisation. Shortly after its release, percussionist Jamie Muir would leave the music industry for a Buddhist monastery in Scotland, and the quartet would go back to record Starless and Bible Black, a semi-live, improvisational feast. And returning to his usual habits, Robert Fripp would fire violinist David Cross shortly thereafter, and finally the trio of Bruford, Wetton, and Fripp would go to the studio one last time to record the jazz-infused metal of Red, probably the most concise album of the trilogy, at which point this era of the band would finally implode, and that would be that until the 80s. So this is prog truly for the connoisseurs. So I have an uncomplicated loving relationship with the first 2 King Crimson albums, and there's even a time in my life where I appreciated the next 2, Lizard and Islands. But these 3, Lark's Tongue, Starless, and Red, have confounded and intrigued me in equal measure from day one. So I have many a good memory with these albums and with these gents. So here to confound and intrigue me, I am joined by Ryan Robinson.
Hello, Ian.
Hello, Ryan. And Brian the Gan. Hello, Brian.
G'day, Ian.
Good day. So, as I said, we're covering their 3 1972-73 albums, Lark's Tongue and Aspic, Starless, and Red.
I was going to start with a question for both of you, actually. Of these 3, where did you start, and how did that go?
Well, I think I've said this on this podcast before, but King Crimson in general, I always just call it Ian and Ryan music because I've never quite had the love for them that you two do. And I've heard their catalog at least through Red. Probably college. You guys are getting in. I feel like, Ryan, you had a Lark's Tongue Aspic T-shirt.
That's correct. I had a Red T-shirt too, actually, which I think I still have.
Wow.
Somewhere.
Yeah, so I guess to answer your question, I'd have said that I probably just started with Lark's Tongue and Aspic because it was like, yeah, all the in the court stuff, classic prog, everyone's loving it. And then it's like, well, what's the next thing they did? And the next thing literally that they did was Lark's Tongue and Aspic. And then I just did I did these three basically in order. Starless, with the one noticeable exception, completely fell off my radar. But Lark's Tongue and Red have always kind of like been around for me in the prog world. I think these are not easy, fun Sunday albums. I guess we'll go with this one then. So this era obviously is a pretty self-conscious and literal break, like this new members completely from the previous late 60s, early 70s prog. Why do you think this version gelled?
This one seemed to me a whole lot less dour and more fun, which, comparing themselves to themselves, I don't know how much that's saying, but
yeah,
what John and Bill were able to do, obviously Bill being just made his escape from Yes at this point. They made it just more of a band that felt like a jazz ensemble getting together and like wanting to have some fun. Obviously, Bill was Mr. Improv and was dying to do things this way, but it just doesn't have that like orchestral bombast of the first two albums, which again, I also love them. They are extremely pretentious, I think. So this is getting away from that a bit. It's having some very weird fun, but it's more fun.
Yeah, I would also say that, as you say, with Bill and actually even so, Jamie Muir, the percussionist, I think Fripp is working with partners here. They feel more like equal partners on a jazz metal journey rather than his studio help, which he always had for the other albums. It was like Fripp assembles an album with some randos. This felt very much like Fripp is working with people. So what do you think with this? What was the vein of goodness that Robert Fripp discovered for these albums?
I think they finally learned how to groove, because to answer my own question from a second ago, the moment I first heard this era, and this might have actually been the first time I ever heard King Crimson, was in high school, and it starts with Red, and it starts in your car, Ian, actually, the first few bars, and Fripp, instead of being, he has plenty of time to get weird later, but he actually hits a groove. There's a riff there, and that's how it starts.
In his own way.
I was kind of hooked from this. Wow, what is this?
So with this massive, lineup change, is King Crimson Robert Fripp?
I mean, yes, in a sense. I think, as we were alluding to at the beginning, I feel like the big one for me is King Crimson was only Robert Fripp for the first four albums, with some other people. I think this one's more, this is Fripp, Wetton, and Bruford, with two guys helping out. I think Fripp found people who could match him, and he complimented them no less. Like, that's insane. He was like, I think he called Bill Bruford and John Wetton the flying brick wall, because they do just have like an intensity to the rhythm section that he could then play off of with his, obviously intense guitar. Likewise, I think David Cross and Jamie Muir added, some fun sound effects basically, but I felt like he got to play with people rather than make them play for him. So we've just done Brain Salad Surgery from ELP and 1970s Yes, and I've mentioned Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. So these are obviously the series of 70s bands becoming their most themselves. Do you think that is also true for this? Or do you think this is a wiping the slate clean?
I feel like my answer is biased, though, because this is my favorite era. So in my mind, it's the zenith of their band, because I don't like what happens after this, but I think it's an opinion, not a fact.
I guess you can hear with the other bands an inevitable march towards Tales from Topographic Oceans or Brain Salad Surgery. I think with this, King Crimson, I think that it's literally, on a personal level, a different band. So I think he's starting fresh, and maybe it's unfair to compare the two.
I guess maybe I can't get over the lineup change. And it's interesting where it's not totally foreign to their earlier work, the sound of this trilogy. So on one hand, I do feel it's wiping the slate clean. But on the other hand, I feel like, and this is very personal to me, the great parts of King Crimson are still here, but the worst parts are still here. So
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, they are still the same band. So yeah, I guess I'm kind of giving a non-answer, but I see it both ways.
Yeah.
You may have answered your own question from a second ago, Brian, that King Crimson is Robert Fripp because he brings the best parts and the worst parts right there along with him. He's the one constant.
So for you there, Brian, what were the best and the worst parts? Like when you think of like this is what King Crimson does great and this is what they do awfully.
Well, you get some great highs. You know, like, there are some truly really good songs in this trilogy. You know, there's a couple I picked out, like Starless, Night Watch are just truly great. But then it'll meander into violin solos and like some songs are just classical music. They're not necessarily bad songs, but like it's not even rock music. It's just stuff.
just stuff. Yeah. No, I will. I'll give you that. I think we'll talk about the two faces of this era of King Crimson, but I think you put your finger on the pulse there. I think they have songs and they have jazz noodling. And basically, and by jazz noodling, I mean endlessly building chromatic guitar scales. And we'll get to all of that in a second, but yes, they have those two faces. And okay, so you know, I do feel like if you do like endlessly crescendoing guitar scales, this could be considered a bit of a renaissance. And I know, Ryan, you are pretty fond of this era. So what are the most outlandish bits that still work for you?
For me, it's funny, we just talked about the violin. That it gives it this like earnestness and warmth that the previous albums don't have, because you know we love the Mellotron, it's fine, but that has a very like, again, the thing I love, a very dated, corny sound though. It's big synthetic strings, right? Whereas like, oh no, David Cross is actually playing a violin here, and it sounds, I don't know, organic and good. I do think that's outlandish because I can't imagine also anything weirder than like having a solo violinist in a rock band now. Like, of course. That is outlandish and strange. If anyone wants to try mentioning Dave Matthews Band, you don't count. So
Brian was raising his hand.
I will disqualify my own opinion there.
No, and I was going to say, I think to that point, you know, you're saying like the chilliness of the Mellotron sound. I think in a more broad sense, the thing, like the first two albums have the orchestral bombast that we all love. The Mellotron is a key component of that. We obviously have not talked about the two middle albums, Lizard and Islands, and both of those had the problem where it was noodling, not Robert Fripp kind of playing basketball with other people. Like it was just chilly instrumentals or meandering songs and then just slow jazzy builds, as opposed to this where you feel like everyone's contributing and chucking back and forth stuff. There's some violin going on, you know, there's some crazy percussion, and everyone's like throwing like musical ideas at each other. And I think that organicness is what you're responding to.
Yeah.
It feels like five people are playing in a room together and having a good time doing it.
Yeah, they're passing the ball, making assists, doing layups, like having fun with each other. Little Harlem Globetrotters action, as opposed to, I think those Islands and Lizard are mostly Robert Fripp running around in the gym by himself with the ball and tripping and falling a lot.
Yeah, just on a treadmill. Yeah.
What's the old joke? Playing handball against the curtains.
Yeah.
I think overall this era could be defined as we have a violinist now.
Ooh.
I'm sorry to. I'm not gonna. This is not a straight disagreement with you, Ryan, but it's used so much and so prominently. I think it's overused. If I had a time machine and I wasn't using it to like save Anne Frank, I would say,
Jesus
David,
Christ. Jesus
you
Christ.
get to use this violin on one song per album.
Oh.
Choose wisely. You can't use it on every album, but there's a few weird little parts. I think it's was it Easy Money, where it's like rocking hard, but then you hear like boop, 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 boop. Like there's just this...
That's definitely Jamie Muir.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's the other dedicated percussionist. It's what you're responding to.
Yeah, and he's not even a drummer. He's just the percussionist, which meant he really was running around on stage
whizzing with his doing-doings.
Yeah, if he got locked in the bathroom before live shows, I wouldn't hate it.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. I'd be okay with it.
You'll miss it when it's gone.
Will we?
That's all I'm going to say. Okay, here we go.
Because if you could do a little chopped and screwed remix with that gone, would you really be that sad?
You know what? When we come to it, I'm going to defend the percussion.
Please do.
But we'll get to that in a second. So I've got one final thought about this. So I was reading the Rolling Stones 100 best albums to whatever before you whatever. And they said somewhere in the Trout Mask Replica album, so this is the infamous / kind of famous, yeah, exactly, Captain Beefheart art rock album. Of Trout Mask Replica, they said something like one of the most challenging records in the musical canon. And I actually was like, that word challenging, what is being challenged? Is it good? Is it useful to challenge anything? You know, like King Crimson, I feel like is a good band to chew over this concept of challenging. Because I feel like I do feel challenged, but I don't know what I mean by that.
This is going to make me sound really pretentious, so it's fine. This is a prog rock podcast. I think there's a difference between being challenging and being transgressive for transgression's sake. And I think that's where Trout Mask Replica goes. It's unlistenable.
Yeah, it's brutal. It's aggressive.
Oh, it sure is.
No, and I feel like at the very essence of what I need in a song, I need that someone could just go up on a stage and play it with just them and a guitar, and it still sound good.
Yeah.
And then you can add crazy things to that, but I want to be entertained. And though I want them to play what they like, I want to like what they play.
Well, yeah, it doesn't have to be a musical Jodorowsky movie. Like, come on. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm dunking on Captain Beefheart really hard, but God, I hate that. I hate that album.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say, I feel like there's an element of if an artist wanted to connect in their way, whatever their way is, if they're trying to connect with you and they like what they're playing and it leads them on an artistic journey, that's great. I think if it's you just want to challenge someone to challenge them, I'm like, nah, you're just kind of poking me to poke me.
Yes.
And then, yeah, I think that's what you're responding to with good old Captain Beefheart. So there we go.
I just have one last thought. So Lark's Tongue was released in March of 73, and then Red, the third album, was released in October 74. So they just cranked these three out. This was a period of intense production and creativity. And this is not my original thought. This is actually something I read on Reddit, but I think it's an interesting thing, and I think we should revisit this idea at the end of Red. These three albums, I think, have a very similar design language, and they're so big and so bombastic, and I'm curious to see if you feel the same way, but there's a lot of forgettable stuff. Not outright, like, bad stuff. Okay. But in these three albums, especially given how fast they were created, is there one truly great album that you could make from these three? Could you pick out pieces to create one truly good album?
I would say yes, absolutely. I would say if you're just saying, is there 40 minutes of generically pleasing music? I believe there is, and we're about, over the course of this mini-series, we're going to hit 9 songs. I'll leave it to you to decide if they're the best 9 songs, but you know, they're 9 songs worth talking about. There's definitely others you could chuck in and out. If there's 40 minutes a great album, there's 40 minutes great album. The only thing I'll say about that point, it just ain't this era of King Crimson unless you have the aggressive jazz metal. Because it's like, yeah, if you just want the funky part of Easy Money, that's great, but then you've got Grand Funk Railroad. Like, you don't have King Crimson. You've lost the essence of being aggressively annoyed by guitar shrieking.
I'm sorry, I just was recalling that joke from The Simpsons where the Who makes a guest appearance and, you know, Homer gives them the set list and they're like, Homer, half of these are Grand Funk Railroad songs.
So yeah, I know. To answer your point, yes, I believe there's probably a very easy 40 minutes of music in here. But is it King Crimson? We don't know.
We could call it Lark's Tongue in Bible Red.
Ooh.
Okay, So we are starting with the first album of the trilogy, Lark's Tongue and Aspic, named after the rare food item Lark's Tongue encased in aspic.
A delicious dish.
Yeah, a delicious dish. So aspic is a gross meat gelatin made popular in the 50s, 60s, 70s. I don't know. Honestly, gross British cooking.
Oh, it's worse. This is 1950s America cooking. Aspics.
1950s America.
Oh,
cooking.
yes. So they're recording this and naming the album this, a good 20 years after the fashion of putting things into giant gelatin molds died out. But that's what an aspic is.
Yeah. The album was named after Jamie Muir was like, we should call this album Lark's Tongue and Aspic. Retrospectively, Robert Fripp said it kind of fit the music because it was this delicate thing, a lark's tongue encased for all to see in a clear gelatin aspic. So here we go. The founding ethos, I believe, of this era of King Crimson was basically they wanted free jazz, kind of like we're just going to go where the music takes us, and they wanted to combine it with the tonalities of Eastern classical music. So not our nice simple 7-note diatonic scale. They wanted to add chromaticity. Boom. Anyways, what ended up happening, you take some jazz, you smash in some kind of metalish, harsh tonalities and harmonics, you got yourself some jazz metal. So we're on Lark's Tongue and Aspic, Part 1. So this used to be actually a massive, massive skip it for me. It is a hefty meal, much like Lark's Tongue and Aspic. But I do think actually it sets up the style of this era of King Crimson pretty well. So there's lots of percussion freakouts, not many like solid melodies you can just hang your hat on, lots of violin squealing. And this is the first of the two halves of the King Crimson era we're on, where we've got the climbing chromatic guitar builds.
It has never been a skip it for me. There are parts of it where you have to eat the vegetables you don't want to first before. But
Yeah.
Without those parts, I don't know. I think you need that contrast to get to the parts that are enjoyable, because the main guitar riff is unbelievably good. When, again, the flying brick wall gets going, John and Bill, like, playing some funky bass, and Bill's drum work is not just, tinkling nonsense here. They keep the ship upright, and it works really well. For the first time, I listened to this with like noise-canceling headphones, and the details make it really interesting. And the outro still legitimately gives me chills. It's so good.
Yep.
And I don't know I don't know. We need Ed to tell us how that sound, like that guitar sound, was made. But I don't know.
Yeah, I was gonna say just that like intense, like sliding, almost cello-esque guitar sound.
Yeah, and it's so. And I have to resist the temptation to try and make that noise here on the podcast, because I'm not going to subject our audience to that. But
Brian, first thoughts about the song?
This to me is a type of song in prog rock I would call. Even though I'm a man of 35 now, I'm still terrified listening to this, that my mom is going to walk in being like, "What is this? What is this? What are you doing?
Turn this noise off."
Yeah.
There's some interesting parts. I just don't know if this fusiony stuff is for me.
Yeah, that's very fair.
And you get Bill Bruford, who is, I think, inarguably the greatest drummer in prog rock, one of the great rock drummers, period.
Yeah.
And he, as we've said, is now free from Yes, and he's free to do whatever he wants. But this is a little bit like George Lucas, who, when he made the Star Wars trilogy, he was restrained by studios. He had directors do the second and third film, but then the 90s roll around, and he is at full power and can do whatever he wants. And that's not necessarily the right thing. I think all of us need to operate in some limits, and Bill is just going nuts. Everyone is going nuts.
He's limitless. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think maybe this is the time, and this just shows my ignorance of the music business. Maybe they should have had studio notes, like movies. They should have just slipped it in, being like, a little less jazz, guys.
I was
Are there studio notes in music? Does that happen?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Producers, yeah, they'll.
I think the big one is not. Dear God, not in 1970s King Crimson. if you are, say, Ariana Grande, there will be people who come in and say, actually, we really need a more bass here, less bass there. Like, they're trying to design the next hit. I'm fairly sure the studio executives that oversaw this production didn't even know they were releasing this album. So, and then, to skip ahead, none of these albums did anything commercially. They're all just in their little world critical darlings. So
None of these were singles, right?
Oh yeah. No, Lark's Tongue was definitely that was released as a single.
What?
Yeah, they did Lark's Tongue, the 8-minute shave down version.
No.
It's King Crimson's only #1 Christmas single. No, so actually one interesting point about the song, so we jest about the singles, but this song has a lot of moments where you're like, oh, that's almost like a pretty raging normal song. They just string it together with a bunch of other stuff. I think a wise Brian once said in the last episode, I don't know where I am in regards to Tales from Topographic Oceans. And I think that's how I feel sometimes about some of these more extended jazz freakouts, where I personally, and this might just me being a simpleton, I like to have a hook so that I know where I am. And some of these songs can just feel like, okay, we're on to another riff, and another riff, and another riff. And with one exception, which we'll talk about towards the end of this, I feel like a lot of their extended solos don't have a obvious architecture, but we'll get to all that. The one other point I want to make about this song, at the very top of the musical adventure, I think Robert Fripp wanted both jazz and gamelan, which is the classical music of Indonesia, as, again, kind of these musical North Stars. And in both styles, they are styles in which the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So the point of both, like, kind of post-bop jazz, you're thinking your Miles Davises and stuff, and then gamelan, where you have a bunch of people each playing a different instrument, is that you have masters playing their various instruments, and you can hear all of the band come together for a thing. And I think this era of King Crimson, again, within the limits of metal jazz, I think they nail that, where I think you can hear all 5 people working together as different cooks chucking their ingredients into this broth.
Yeah. I just wish they would have followed our recipe.
Oh, dear. So, we come on to a Book of Saturdays. So this is the other face of King Crimson. This is what King Crimson can also be in this iteration. So these very, very beautiful melodies, and John Wetton just singing with his beautiful crooner voice. Mm-hmm. I don't really know, there's an interesting blend of sounds. I'm not really sure what the main instrument is. It's kind of just a bunch of textures. I think they can let a song shine through when they want to.
This is more what I'm talking about. I think we have John Wetton now on vocals, and I think this is a good use of his voice. I quite like his voice, actually.
Yeah.
Believe it or not. This is by far the shortest song on this album, and it's good. I like it.
Yeah. Nice and concise, beautiful song.
Yeah, John's vocals, they give the band a soul that nobody did before. Love Greg Lake.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Not a soulful voice.
Yeah, he was an epic, bombastic, opera singer.
Like reading poetry to music is that's what Greg does, and it's it's fine.
Yeah.
And
it's his thing. Yeah.
I don't think we need to talk about Gordon Haskell or Boz Burrell or what they contributed to the previous 2 albums. But
yeah. Well, I was going to say, I will defend both of them in so much as they were both decent singers, just not King Crimson singers.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think you need a vocal element that can go toe to toe with, in this case, Bill's drums and Robert's guitar, but you need a voice that goes with that. You can't have a normal voice.
No. But yeah, he makes the lyrics legitimately heartfelt, even though they don't quite make sense to me. That's okay.
Yeah.
And there is a good main ingredient in this song, and maybe I think that's why this one appeals. You might make this point later, but this is Robert Fripp just playing a sweet little melody on the guitar. It's downright mainstream, and it works really well.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I guess the other thing I'd say about that, so when we did both In the Court and In the Wake of Poseidon, I forgot how little he uses distortion and overdrive. He actually goes mainly acoustic for all that. Mm-hmm. And I think practicing without, I will call it the crutch of overdrive, means I think that you can really refine filling a song with notes via guitar, which he does to great effect with this kind of this jazz tone. Like the notes are so beautiful and you can just hear them coming through. And he doesn't need to blast your ears out with overdrive, though he does on occasion.
Yeah.
So we skip to Easy Money, the last song we will talk about on Lark's Tongue and Aspic. So as you guys have probably all heard before, I am a explorer, always searching for the best na-na-na-nas in music. And I think this is one of my favorites. And the beginning, dee-dow-dow-ba-dee-da-dow. I love na-na-nas in music, but they have to be done well. And that dee-da-dow-da-dee-dow is such a good, interesting opening vocal riff. I mean, we're just kicking it off. And it's so heavy and like mushy, and like you feel the weight of the Easy Money. Any initial thoughts about Easy Money?
It is pretty rockin'. However, it does feel like they had a room full of instruments and they were determined to use every single one in recording this. And I would love, how they went back and detuned the Beatles albums, like Let It Be Naked. Like, I'd love to just strip some of this away, because I think there is some pretty solid rockin'.
Yeah,
I just think it gets a little muddled, and mind you, I'm going to say this pretty much about every song on these 3 albums.
That there was too much extra stuff. Yeah,
but it's pretty good. I mean, yeah, and I do agree with you. The intro is very funny, and I mean, there's no doubt in my mind everyone here is enormously talented. I mean, you're assembling like the biggest nerds ever, and they all are so good. I just think they need a little bit more direction.
Yeah. I was going to say, I guess, so in terms of the sound effects here, so the middle riff is just an E minor slow build, and it's one of my favorite uses of their, what I call annoying jazz. I really like for this recorded version to have the percussions whizzing in and out, because I was like, it just adds a little sonic interestingness. Brian, you can get your wish, because they play all of this live, and most of the live recordings, Jamie Muir's gone by that point. So they have all of the rocking and none of the clocking and tick-tocking and whatever else they've got going on there. I think the other thing the song has that I very much appreciate is massive dynamics, because the bass is heavy. And I think it then cuts out and you go to these like very sparse verses where it's like literally just Robert Plant going ding, ding, ding.
Well, Robert has to show restraint here. So he stays away from his endlessly cascading solos, and he lets John and Bill find a groove. Maybe I just like them better. Maybe I don't. Maybe I'm not the biggest Robert Fripp fan in the world. I don't know.
You might not be.
Because I realize all of my comments seem to be like, oh, I like what John and Bill are doing here.
Yeah.
It's funny, though, you mentioned the live show portion and how well this comes across live, because Jamie's pretty much gone. This was one of those moments, though, where we must have been the absolute coolest kids in college, because, mind you, this is the mid-2000s. And I remember specifically being excited for your Great Deceiver box set to show up in the mail to our dorm, so we could have a listening party. And I'm trying to like imagine what that. But obviously we didn't. But try to explain to our friends in the mid-2000s in college what we were waiting for and why we were excited to listen to this live album from a band no one had heard of.
And why Ryan was dressed like a lark, I was dressed like a Bible, and then Brian was just painted red, waiting by the mailbox.
I don't know how we weren't expelled, honestly. Antisocial behavior. But that box set is a collection of this era and this era alone. Like, I think it's 73, 74, and that's it. It's them touring all of this material.
And I was going to say, I think this one, and we'll talk about the arc as we progress, but basically this one I feel like is their most studio one. Then they hit the road, and you get into Starless, which is a much more live event, and then they go back into the studio before they break up, and that's Red. So I feel like you start here, which is, it's weird to say, their cleanest album, before blossoming into Starless and then contracting back to Red. Yeah, so we'll get through all of that in a bit. Any final thoughts about Lark's Tongue in Aspic?
I think you said it right earlier, Ryan. Listening to this album is antisocial. Like when we were in college, it's like, you guys should be at parties,
right?
Not listening to King Crimson live albums. The dean was just like, guys, here's alcohol. Yeah. Go have fun.
Yeah, please.
Stop doing this.
This is an embarrassment to the school.
You're melting your brain. So anyways, there you go. That was Lark's Tongue in Aspic. So we'll leave it there for today. But join us next time for the next album in this miniseries, Starless and Bible Black.